Okay, welcome to the Cinder Yoga mid-cycle. We're R minus 17, so 17 weeks out from the release. I noticed there's some new people here, so the way I usually do this is if you keep IRC open, there's a link to the Etherpad there. Probably the best way to use BlueJeans is to open the Etherpad so that you can take notes in it or write questions. So anyone can do that at any time during the meeting, so feel free. I share it just so that it's there in the recording. But probably what you want is more real estate to see your fellow Argonauts. I'm glad I remembered that term. So for anyone who's wondering, at the PTG, we named the Cinder backend as Argo, which is the name of the horse of Xena the Warrior Princess. And Simon realized that we could do double duty and name the team the Argonauts. So that's what we are. I need to use that more often. Okay, so anyway, yeah, take notes in the Etherpad. I'll try to keep it scrolled so that, what we're talking about shows up in the recording. So the way we do this, we're just going to start at the beginning and just go through spending as much or little time as each topic takes. And hopefully we'll get through this in 2 hours. I pushed my stuff to the bottom, like I said, because I can always do it at the next Cinder meeting if we have to. Just a couple of things to remind you, just to set dates, because I know holidays are coming up in a few weeks for many people. The spec freeze is Friday, the 17th of December. So basically a little over 2 weeks from today. And then the new driver merge deadline is, I think it's the week after M2, which is the traditional one, but because of the holidays, we pushed a little bit. So that's Friday, the 21st of January. So if you're contributing a new driver, please be aware of that. And reviewers, please also be aware of that because we need to get things moving. Okay, we're recording, and that's basically it. I don't think I have any news or anything, so I guess we can start. So Trent, I see that you're here, and you've got the first topic on here about disk geometry support. So take it away.
Sure. Thanks for the invite. So I proposed a patch. It was probably a couple of years ago now to pass through to VMs that a block device would prefer 4K I/O rather than 512 byte I/O. And for Linux, this doesn't matter because it pretty much always sends 4K I/O, but it matters a lot for Windows, which sends 512 byte aligned I/O a lot. And so for Ceph specifically, anytime that comes in, you incur a read, modify, write penalty, which is pretty devastating to performance. So I'd written up a patch for that, but the feedback I got was basically that rather than doing it in the Ceph driver, we should elevate that up to kind of apply to, iSCSI and Fiber Channel and other things, which I sort of agree with, but I did have some trouble kind of working through the nest of the inheritance of those drivers and figuring out where that would go and that kind of thing. So, and I'm not really sure. This is my first meeting, so I'm not quite sure what the process is, but I was invited to come and discuss it for the cycle and maybe look for some help to, figure out where to best place it.
Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, so notice, I don't know if John or Eric are here, actually, who both suggested moving this. So, I mean, basically what you would like is some advice about how to restructure and where to put it in the,
Yeah, or the best person to speak to out of the meeting, even I guess for that. And also, I don't know if it could be accepted as is, or if there's any other process that would be needed to, in terms of spec or something like that, for the cycle.
right.
Well, I think it is easier than we may think because, as far as I understand it, what they were saying is that the configuration option should not be RBD specific. So basically, you just have to get your config.str option and move it out to the generic driver file. I think it's cinder-volume-driver.py. Just put it there, and now it's available for all the drivers. A different matter is what happens when this information is not being reported by drivers. Because, for example, in your patch, RBD driver could be reporting it. Okay, now who is going to be using this information? Is there any OS break location? Is it Nova?
So it's already so the info is mostly going to the libvirt side of things, and it then puts it in and it takes care of QEMU and whatever. So I mean, it's not really Ceph specific. It's more about just getting the data into the data for libvirt or whatever is writing that out to consume. So the implementation code could also. Sorry.
So what I mean is, who is going to use this additional information? And you just said libvirt.
Right.
So Nova has to be able to pass it, right?
Yeah, I guess it goes to Nova first. Unfortunately, it's a while back since I worked on it. I can't quite remember how it's passing through. But yeah, I guess it's going to Nova and it's giving it to libvirt, which gives it to QEMU.
And does Nova already have this support for passing this information?
It's all there already. It was implemented in another driver a while back. I think it was SolidFire or something. And so all the support was there. I just had to get the RBD driver to say it wanted that block size, basically.
Okay, and the other driver that currently has this, does have this configuration option or?
So in their case, I believe it rather than a config option, it gets it from the SolidFire driver. So I think it gets it from the SolidFire appliance. In the case of Ceph, there's no real option for it. It's just makes sense to sort of specify it. So hence why I just made it a Cinder option to say whether to expose it or not. And the main reason for that is compatibility. So again, with Windows, if you just switch it, sometimes you can have compatibility problems with the VM. So I wanted to leave it configurable so that you didn't, break existing environments. For the most part, there's the hybrid mode where you tell it, I prefer 4K, but I accept 512. That generally just works. But there's also a mode where you can say, I only want 4K. And if you change to that, it tends to, it causes compatibility issues with some Windows applications, including Exchange and stuff, that'll actually break if you just change it out from under them. So that's why I had it configurable. But in most cases, it would be desirable to just report the 4K preferred option.
So what I'm failing to currently see is how this would work in drivers that, like the SolidFire you mentioned, that are actually getting this information from the backend.
Yeah,
what would we expect? Yeah, Simon, sorry.
Yeah, it seems very bizarre to me. I'm just looking at the SolidFire driver now, and it must be something to do with the architecture of SolidFire itself and the way they build out their cluster, that they're allowing 512, which just seems strange to me. Just in general, because SolidFire is supposed to be a fairly fast flash-based array that wouldn't be affected by any sort of read, modified, write. So I'm not even sure why they're even doing it. And the references in the driver, there's like 5 references to it, and it doesn't seem to do anything. So I'm not sure.
It's a bit sparse, yeah.
What it's actually doing even. And I think we probably need a SolidFire expert to explain what they're trying to send this emulate 512 parameter for. Even B.
Oh yeah, emulate. Oh, is that a configuration option for?
Yeah, it's a configuration option that is sent by the Solidfire driver to emulate 512, and that what it does then is it changes the where's it gone? The provider geometry in the connection info. That's all it does. Is it changes it to 512 or 4096. So I'm not even sure what it's even trying to achieve there.
So the so what I guess there's three modes that you'll tend to want to send to Nova, either a physical and logical block size of 512, and then you can send a physical of 512, but a logical of 512, but a physical of 4096, which means you prefer 4K, but you would accept the 512 byte write. And you can send 4K, which means I won't accept any writes less than 4K. So I guess that option they're basically exposing whether you want to say, I guess SolidFire prefers 4K, but we're exposing the option to say we'll accept 512 or not.
Well, I don't know what it's actually doing because it's changing the provider geometry parameter, and what you're doing in your patch is changing the physical block size and the logical block size parameters. So the SolidFire is not even touching those.
So that happens in so the provider geometry goes in the database, in the Cinder database, from what I recall.
Right.
And then converting that to set the logical and physical, that's also happening just inside of Cinder. That's not really from the SolidFire side.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember why it has both. I think my recollection is I think that SolidFire added the whole provider geometry part, and so I was kind of piggybacking on that. And then I consume that, and then I think the logical block size and physical block size tag, that's what you're sending to Nova. That's what it's expecting to then convert.
Yeah. This sounds
so it's
like
a case of what's in the Cinder database versus what's being sent to Nova, and kind of
seems to me this is another John special, just because SolidFire is weird. Personal opinion. Jay's sniggering.
If you say his name 2 more times, he may appear.
Oh, I know. I've got to be very careful.
I'm still not sure who is actually using that provider geometry.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is.
Because I looked in Nova.
So when last I checked, the SolidFire was the only driver that had consumed it.
What I meant is that in the driver, they set the provider geometry in the connection information. So in general, when we set something in the connection information, it's for the consumer of the volume when it attaches to do something with it. It can be OS brick as part of the process of making the connection, or it can be Nova itself that consumes that to do something specific. But I can't find anywhere in Nova or OS brick where the provider geometry is actually used.
And it's actually
I see. So that's done in the. So that's in the iSCSI target class. So in Cinder volume targets iSCSI.py, in the iSCSI target class, it reads that provider geometry flag, and then it sets the same things I'm setting, which is the physical and logical block size properties.
So it's in OS brick.
So that's the code I guess I duplicated out of the iSCSI driver into the RBD driver that to some extent probably should just be in some superclass of both of those. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I just didn't know that they were using that target, and they are. Yep. I think I am starting to understand with this last bit of information you provided. I think I'm getting.
This is how I felt when I wrote the patch. I was like chasing everything everywhere, trying to figure out where the stuff was going. Yeah.
Where I'm trying to do what they do. Okay. Yeah. I think I see now. Yes. And I assume that nobody is using that. Firm. Yep. At least they have references to that. Yeah, they get it. Okay, now we see the picture of how Nova consumes it to pass it to libvirt, like you described. Now we only have to figure out how setting it as part of a Cinder driver configuration could interact with drivers that actually set it, for example, cannot dynamically change it or is set on the back end, things like that. Because I see for the RBD driver, the RBD volumes are not created in any way differently, right?
That's correct, yeah.
But other drivers may require a change, right? If somebody forces, I don't know, that they want a specific mode, the 512, they may require to tell it during creation, right? Like the Solidifier driver does.
Yeah, so there could be drivers that want to only set 4K and need to enforce that, I guess. You know, in a way that you can't override. Because some I/O targets, just if you send them a 512 byte I/O, it'll just reject it. So yeah, I guess some drivers, including Solidifier, obviously would need the ability to, you know, say that, I guess, enforce a minimum or something, regardless of what you set as a config option.
And that is, I think, the point we are at now, deciding on how to make the configuration option in the general driver work with the different drivers. The rest seems okay.
See,
I just don't know whether any of the drivers actually want to do that in practice, because pretty much every I mean, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think part of this is to do with, I mean, this only really applies to, I mean, this is why I'm struggling a little bit. I think this only applies to spinning disk, doesn't it?
No, in fact, it almost applies more to flash than spinning disk, if anything.
So is it, but the you know, something like a flash array like ours, like a sort of flash-based device, we have no way of because we just provide raw disk, you know, and whether it's 512E or 4K is irrelevant to us. It's all done. Isn't that all more important at the operating system level that's mounting it and formatting it?
So,
Yeah,
I mean, actually, no, so you're right, it does apply to spinning disk. Well, it applies to any storage format where you can't write 512 bytes without basically reading 4K off the disk, modifying that 512 and writing it back. So there are hard disks that do that, and Ceph does that because it checks something at 4K boundaries.
It's anything that's got an old-fashioned SCSI controller in front of it, like a spinning disk, or an HDD that's maybe even an NVMe SDD. It's not going to apply to any of the big external devices like the Dells or the. I don't know why. I think Solidifier potentially because they may use spinning disk in some of their older versions. I don't know, but certainly it wouldn't apply to any of the new modern flash-based devices. They would not care because flash talks at 512 bytes anyway.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately at a lower level, flash talks at much larger sizes, so it's already kind of dealing with this problem anyway. You know, it's doing hundreds of kilobyte block erasers and stuff. So, yeah.
One question, because to fix the RPD driver, couldn't it be? So if I am understanding correctly, what would it be enough to know that there is on the other side of the? Let me put it this way: when RPD driver receives a connection initialize connection, it knows that in the other end there is a Windows system, so it knows beforehand. Could it set a specific disk geometry based on that, so that this performance issue gets resolved automatically, or?
So we should always set this even for Linux. It just happens that Linux doesn't usually need to know, so most of the time it doesn't matter because it uses the page cache for everything. It ends up doing 4K because that's the page cache granularity. But there are some rare cases that it'll send smaller IOs, but it's usually not. But so like Linux supports these flags, we'll see them and like respect them and that kind of thing. So there's no reason not to set it for any OS really. So yeah, you don't really need a special case Windows. It's just a case of putting it there for everyone, and it just happens to matter the most for Windows because it actually does 512 byte IO by default.
I think it's interesting. I'm just looking at.
There's also another thing is it's alignment. It's not just about having a proper block size, and it's also if you misaligned creating the partition tables. So if you have 4K blocks you present to the host, which align to the actual storage that you have. If there's multiple layers of mapping and misalignment, I just posted a link to NetApp explaining that. All storage providers explain that you should run your virtual disks you present to your virtual machines aligned. Otherwise, you will have an amplification, reading more blocks than necessary. And it's even worse if you have 512 bytes running misaligned to the 4K blocks running underneath.
Yeah,
Where
so
is
that can happen.
The link?
Oh yeah.
Oh, on IRC. Okay, thanks. I will add it to the Etherpad.
Oh, sorry about that. I just determined there's no chat here, so I used the IRC. Sorry about that.
Yeah, most of the installers now kind of just 4K align anyway, even if it says 512 to kind of work around that issue, but it's a very valid issue, particularly if you've cloned some older, like, physical machines and stuff. Sometimes you had partitions that weren't 4K aligned that caused an issue, so, yeah.
So should we somehow change the configuration option? Because what I'm still worrying about is if a user sets this configuration option and the backend, the storage array cannot actually do whatever the user asks. They ask for 512 and the array cannot do 512. Is that even possible?
So that's theoretically possible, but right now for that to have happened, the driver would have to be setting this geometry to 4K, like already. And the only driver that does that right now is SolidFire.
No.
So
what I mean is, I'm probably explaining it wrong. Okay, if a specific driver creates the volume, the physical volume, and the physical block size is 4K always, and you go to Cinder, set this configuration option, and you set it to 512. Now the user thinks that is forcing the driver to do 512, but the driver is not doing that because it doesn't know about this configuration option, and maybe the backend doesn't even support setting the physical block size to 512.
Good. So you could, for any driver right now, because right now it's always 512, that's the minimum size. And so if you set it to 4K, even for somebody that doesn't know about that, it doesn't really matter. It just means you're sending now, every time you do an IO, you're going to send 4K instead of 512 bytes, maybe unnecessarily. But that happens all the time, right? IOs get merged together and sent in a larger block. So it's not going to cause any kind of breakage where it wouldn't break anything where you're now sending IO the array couldn't accept. You just might send a bigger IO than it was necessary. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm explaining it badly.
No, you're explaining it right, but I don't know if you were giving me the opposite.
So,
If you
so
were
the only
saying
problematic case is if the array only accepts a 4K sized I/O, and you try to send it a 512 byte I/O. Now in
that's
Cinder
the one
right
I
now,
was
the
saying.
only right. So in Cinder right now, the only time that could ever happen is in the SolidFire driver, because it previously would tell a VM that it wanted 4K I/O, and I guess if this config option overrode that, you can now tell the VM to send 512.
Well, no, the default is 512 for SolidFire.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
And this is what they set back in Havana. And I mean, it's an interesting sentence in the documentation for Solid. It says required for KVM hypervisors. So I'm trying to get my head around what that sentence actually means, because to me it seems like it defaults to true, so it's always going to be 512 unless someone specifically tries to say no, don't do 512, which is 4K. Obviously, that's what it sets in the SolidFire driver. But then it's saying that you have to have it at 512 for KVM. Now, is that because KVM back in the Havana days couldn't deal with 4K? I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, that far back, it may not have existed, the support for...
Exactly, so maybe this whole SF emulate 512 in the SolidFire driver is irrelevant anyway.
What Trent was explaining is it's all about the presentation layer towards the consuming side, so the VM. It's not about manipulating anything on the storage. It's just the configuration allows you to instruct the VM or the operating system running in the VM to send proper sizes of blocks that align to the storage in a more sensible way. There's no incompatibility. Is that correct, Trent? Understand it correctly?
So that's correct in all except the case of if you have where it can be possible to have an array that won't accept 4K. But in practice, that only really happens with like actual hard disks. Pretty much all the actual storage arrays won't do that. They'll take the write. It'll just be slower. There's a performance penalty because it's now going to read 4K off disk, merge the 512 bytes that got into it, and then write it back again. So, in all practical cases, it's not incompatible. It's just, it's a performance hit.
But just the same that we have now, the other way. It's just about the operator or the administrator of the cloud setting the correct value that makes the most sense.
Right.
Or giving the ability which your patch proposes.
So the only thing we have to be careful about, though, is changing what we've told a VM after it was deployed, because that can cause issues with some Windows applications where they structure a file format based on the physical block size of the disk. And if that physical block size changes, suddenly the file doesn't, make sense anymore. Having said that, right now the block size is persisted in the Cinder database, so therefore, we should get that anyway.
So
no,
you're saying that the configuration cannot change while it is attached, but if I detach and I attach it again, can it be changed?
Well, I mean, it can be changed, but if there's data on that disk, it may not work anymore. So Exchange and Windows Backup will both break if you take data on a disk that was 4K and switch it either way.
Okay, then this patch that you proposed would break with RBD 10, because what happens is that this configuration is stored when you call to do the connection information. But that connection information doesn't live in the volume itself. It lives in the connection, in the attachment record, which is deleted at some point when you detach. So this geometry will be lost in that volume, and then you can restart Cinder with a different configuration, and Cinder will not be able to know that the volume was originally used with a specific geometry.
I got it. That's a good point.
And then we also have more problems when we use Cinder cache, because in the Cinder cache, you download Cinder when you request a volume from a specific glance image. It could create a volume, get the image from glance, create the cache volume, and then clone it. So at that point, that volume already should be marked with a specific geometry. And it can only be used with that geometry.
Got it. So it only really matters
restore would break it as well.
Yeah. So it only really matters for the 4K case. If you set the 512 emulated mode, which solves the performance problem largely, you don't have this compatibility issue. So I guess we could theoretically kind of walk around all those concerns by not trying to support the 4K native mode and just only support the mode where we basically hint that we'd prefer 4K. And then when you do that, none of the compatibility issues exist. And so that would maybe, be a good path.
That could fix the compatibility issues. And could it have any performance impact in any combination or case, or just by hinting that we prefer 4K, Liebherr good? I'm asking if there is any case where performance will be impacted with the 512E option.
So I'm not aware of any case that you would make performance worse with the 512E option. It should always be better, to my understanding. And it also should, to my current knowledge, not cause compatibility issues.
Okay. Because the alternative of configuring it seems to be getting more and more difficult. And, well, not really more and more difficult. It all comes down to this could be needed to be added to the admin metadata field of the volume itself. So we can tell beforehand that the volume was created in a specific way or data has been written in a specific way. But it will also mean that cloning and a bunch of features in Cinder would have to be revised, and that could be really painful just for this.
Yeah, that sounds complicated. Yeah.
So maybe, like you suggest, we can just make the RVD driver return the physical block size of the 512E case, instead of adding it as a configuration option. Just send it.
Yeah, so I think that sounds reasonable, but I would only, I guess, hedge that maybe having a config option would allow, if it turns out there is some compatibility problem, would let people roll it back. That might be useful just to have, but I guess only between the 512 and 512 emulated mode. Just so that, yeah, people have a rollback option if there's something I'm not aware of that is actually broken by this.
Mm-hmm.
That's my only thought, yeah. But it should be a good default and should work Linux, Windows, yeah, to my current understanding.
Okay, so we could do literally something similar to what SolidFire is doing, except for the create, but we ignore it. We just, because they have Ceph emulate 512, which means that in most cases they don't return anything. They just say whatever Liebherr wants to do, it's fine with us. But if that option is set, which is the default, then they send the provider geometry, and only then. So in our case, well, not sorry, they do it the other way around. They do it the other way around.
When it's not set, when it's set to false, it sets the geometry to 4K.
Yeah, so we would do it in reverse, right? When emulated, we send the 4K 512 option, and otherwise maybe we don't send anything.
Yeah. So it's not quite directly comparable to, I guess, SolidFire, because SolidFire is switching from 512, 512 to 4K, 4K. So, I mean, it would break in all the ways you just described, the SolidFire driver would break right now if you change those sizes, whatever. But I guess in a similar way, we could have an option. Just I guess we don't use the same option because it's not quite the same logic. I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, just because Solid, I'm trying to get my head around this. Because SolidFire is setting 512 emulation by default, and therefore they're not changing anything in the provided geometry. That must mean that the provided geometry today, somewhere in Nova or wherever, is 512. Is that correct?
It's 512. 512 is what you get by default if it's not set.
Okay.
Oh. And the performance improvement comes with setting it to 512 4K. Yeah.
Not 4K 4K.
Well, 4K is ideal, but you start running into these compatibility issues that I talked about. Right. So that's where you tell the Windows that I never want an I/O less than 4K. But I found from my testing that you ended up getting like 95% of it 4K aligned and sized, and so it kind of mostly solved the problem and just avoided all the compatibility problems. And that's the way a lot of drives are shipping now. Usually they have the 512 emulated by default, and then you can switch them to the 4K native if you want to, but in practice people aren't doing that as often. So, like in terms of real drives rather than the storage.
But I don't think the SolidFire driver or anybody is setting forcefully anything to 512 looking at the code.
No, that's just what it defaults to. So if you set nothing, then, I mean, yeah, everything's been 512, 512 since forever, unless you did something different. So that's just the default.
Okay.
If it's not changed. Yeah.
And again, this seems to me to be a hangover from the original Havana implementation, because way back when it was only 512. I mean, that was that long ago. No one cared.
Well, but the thing is that Cinder doesn't specify it. That's the thing. That the default is not coming from Cinder. Cinder is just not setting it.
It's coming from Nova, I presume.
Yeah, I mean, it's technically, so I mean, basically, it's never set, so it comes from QEMU, I guess you could argue. But, yeah. If you don't set it.
It actually comes from the hardware it's emulating, so it's been there forever. 512 is just the physical block.
Yeah.
Okay, so in theory, I could. Yeah, and apparently the Cinder code all around this is kind of broken in a way, because Cinder, the ISCSI target initialization code actually looks for provider geometry in the volume itself. And then we have all the problems I mentioned with the cloning and everything. So, yeah. But I think to move on with this, I think we just need a global configuration option that allows you to set the emulation mode, right? And when it's in emulation mode, we pass the 512E option here, the 4K and 512, right? And we can, and I think that should be fine, right?
Yeah, I think that should work. And I feel like we could default in like new releases to be 512 emulated, but I guess if we backported it, you would probably want to default it to what it used to be, right?
To false.
Yeah. That was my intent in the original. Yeah.
Sounds good to me, because like you say, having the option to disable this if suddenly there seems to be problems or anything like that is a good thing. Yeah.
So there's only one last wrinkle, which is whether to persist it in this provided geometry field still, or to move away from that. The only problem being, often when people want to turn this on, they want to retroactively like change all the VMs already deployed because they've hit this performance problem. And so right now you can only do that by editing the database and like, I guess hard rebooting the VM to rewrite the XML and all this sort of stuff.
So if I understand correctly, you start using a volume. You created a VM with a volume. You use it. You can now safely set the 512E mode safely, and there would be no problems.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. Then, if they want to do it to make it happen in the VMs they have, they will need to do one of the options in Nova that refreshes the connection information. There are a couple of them. For example, if you live migrate a VM, then the connection information in the destination will get refreshed. I think if you do a hard reboot, I think it also happened. And probably if you do a shelf and unshelf, so there are mechanisms to get it done because we are not changing the geometry itself. It's in the initialized connection where Cinder sends new data. So we can document it, but I don't think there is any additional feature that we would need in Cinder.
So the provider geometry field that gets persisted in the database, that would also get set again if you live migrate, or does it keep that from the original attachment?
So the thing is that the persistence that it's going in your code when you're setting data, the dictionary data, you're setting the data key with the physical block side, that value is persisted in the database. That is correct. But that doesn't live forever. It only lives as the connection lives. So you attach the volume, we create, and we store it in the database. But as soon as you detach it, that the information is lost because it's not storing the volume itself, is in an attachment of that volume. So what a user would need to do is make sure that information changes. And that change can happen, only happens if Nova requests it. Because Nova needs to destroy that attachment and get a new one. And by getting a new one, it could get the added physical block side and logical block side information. So what the user would need is to make Nova detach and attach the volume. That's the only way they are going to get the new parameters in the connection. I don't know if I'm explaining it. So
that makes complete sense to me. My recollection was if you did like a hard reboot, it would end up reading it out of the database again. But that may be right. Yeah.
That's what I say, that there are some operations in Nova where they refresh the connection information. Yeah. I don't remember from the top of my head which ones they are. I think shelving, for example, shutting off a VM, I think will refresh it. I think shelving, if it actually goes to the shutdown mode, because of the timeout they have, it will also refresh. I know that live migrating, it will, since you're changing from one host to another, on the new host, it will have to get new information. So it will get those new parameters. And I don't know about the hard reboot. I don't know which operation, but we can ask the Nova people to tell us when they refresh the connection and we can document it. If you have this performance problem, you need to do one of these operations in your VMs to get this workaround, or however we want to call it.
Okay.
But in the end, we don't need to add new features to Cinder to get this done. Just by reporting it in the connection information should be fine. And by documenting the operations that could get a refresh.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Anyone has questions or thinks of follow-up stuff, just add it to the Etherpad. So are you okay, Trent? You got what you need?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I appreciate the feedback. I'm sorry for taking up 50 minutes of time. So
No,
I'm
it's
going to
kind of
let
an
you.
important issue, so it's
Yeah,
a good way to get
it's one of
started.
those ones. I really appreciate all that feedback. That's really helpful. And yeah, hopefully I can get that going. Okay.
All right, great. All right, Simon, you're up.
Okay, thanks. I probably won't take 50 minutes with this one. This is more of a brainstorming session and a discussion point. So we've got a customer who is using the Glance image cache, and their images are hundreds, if not sometimes more than 500 gig in size. And they have actually turned their image cache size to 0, so infinity. They don't put a limit on it, which is then causing all sorts of problems because it's now filling the arrays with image caches. And what they're wanting to be able to do is to turn the image cache limits on, but specify that some of the really big, important images are never actually flushed from that cache, so pinned to the cache. So I think it's a really good idea, actually, to be able to do this. But we're going to have to think about how we do this, because currently there is no way of pinning. And I think the only way we're going to do that is to add a new column into one of the databases to say this is a pinned volume in the cache if you've got Glance image cache turned on. And then obviously there's all the API changes that may occur around that. So I'm just open to ideas from anyone, because this is, I mean, mucking around in this is way above my pay grade.
Well, we can avoid API changes if we ask Glance to specify this as an image property. So something like they have a protected set of image properties that start OS_glance, I think. So if we ask them to add OS_glance_ Cinder, we'll come up with a good name. Then on our side, all we'd have to do is recognize that on images.
Okay.
And then you wouldn't have to contact Cinder. And I think that might make sense because, right, you know what images you want that are high usage. So that would probably be taken care of by the images team. And then we don't need a special API call to handle this.
I don't think it's a matter of high usage, because in that case, if I remember
it would
correctly,
be rejected, right?
Exactly, it would not be evacuated. The problem is that
high size.
It's so big. Yeah, exactly, the size. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the problem is if it could be a really, really large, very rarely used image, but an absolutely critical image that when they do want to use it, they need it instantly. That's the problem, because if we go into the LRU scenario, which is how we evacuate stuff out of the cache, you know, it could very well be the least recently used, but we don't want to evacuate it. So we do need something that says don't touch this. If this is in a cache, in the Glance cache, don't touch it.
I would think we'd need something that's a little bit more manageable, like, you know, we have to avoid a situation where something, you know, gets deliberately added to the cache and pinned, and then suddenly changes their mind and said, oh, wait a minute now, I'd like to swap that out for another one. Well, sorry, it's pinned in the cache.
Yeah, because I get that. If they've modified the image in some way and they want to refresh it.
Well, that would be a different Glance image, because I believe images are immutable.
Okay.
But the original one would still be pinned, like you said. If they change it, the pin would be the same one.
Yeah, I give up on my idea to not have an API for this. I think Alan's right. You got to be able to eject stuff manually.
Yeah, you've got to be able to do an override and say, yeah, even though it's pinned, we want it to force removal.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if this is feasible or not, but you know, I wonder if the customer, for example, could seed the cache and then lock the number of images down to a fixed value, and that's how they've got things kind of pinned.
I don't think that would work, because if the image is rarely used, it would be evacuated.
That's true. That's true. Yep.
Brian, I think there is value in your proposition. I just don't think that it's a whole solution, like Alan mentioned. So it is good that could be a default, kind of like this image should be pinned, because you know that it's a huge image, so by default it's pinned. We just need to add also the possibility to unpin images and things like that, which are complementary features, not they don't need to exclude one the other.
Well, that I'm thinking
the property
about.
that Brian's proposed, isn't that changeable on an existing image? So you upload it with this property set, just remove that property, and as soon as the cleanup process comes along, that image that used to be pinned and it couldn't be evacuated or dropped off the cache can now be dropped.
Yeah, the problem is that it could require, or on any cache check, Cinder would have to check all the images from glance for the metadata. So it could, if you have 100 images, it could mean 100 requests to glance each volume creation from those. Performance-wise, it would be problematic.
Yeah, and I mean, this particular customer do have, this is the problem. They're now at the point where they've got literally hundreds and hundreds of glance images.
So I think we cannot, well, we have two options. We do it nicely, where somebody actually, when we expose a specific API to control our cache, or we hack around it with metadata that we currently can use already. Because if we get a glance information in glance, they would set the metadata that gets bring to Cinder when we are setting the cache image, and then admin user can actually go and change that metadata manually with the current APIs.
That's a good point, because I was thinking that we'd need a new parameter, a new column in a database called pinned or something like that. So you do / pinned or / not pinned.
We wouldn't need it. But the thing is that the option I'm saying is not regarding the database change. Is basically how we expose it to admins. Yeah. We can do it a hacky way, which is a new hard-coded field in the metadata or something like that. It's not nice, but it doesn't require new API interfaces or anything. But it's kind of magic, because you have to know about it. Yeah. Otherwise, you don't know that is how it should be done. The proper way, I think, which require more work would be a new APIs where you can list the cache entries, and you can modify and pin and unpin them. Which is more work.
Yeah.
But at least it doesn't look like magic from an operator perspective, because they could check in Cinder client options and they would see that there are cache operations that can be done. So it would be easy for them to, there are things that I can do with the Cinder cache. I can list volume, I can delete volumes, or evacuate, I can pin them. So from an administrator perspective, it's not magic.
And actually that would be that sounds actually quite nice, because, the administrator, it would be great if we could have much more control over the cache. Because today it's like, we have no idea what the hell's going on. It's magic as it is.
Well, you can, if you know the ID, the internal tenant ID, you can list the volumes. You would be able to see them.
Yeah.
But it's like you say, it's not transparent for the administrator. They actually have to know about the internal stuff in Cinder, which is not nice.
But then, the people who use this probably do understand what it's doing anyway. So they sort of understand the internals. And then therefore, because, the people who are using it are probably versed in the documentation about it, we could just update the documentation to say use this new metadata field.
Yeah, I know that I'm the one that said that that is a possibility, but in general, this is the road that we've always taken, the hacky way around it. And in the end, it turns out that the only user that gets to use it, to learn about it, could be probably your user, because you will go and tell them, hey, your problem, you do this and it will get fixed, and nobody else will know about it.
Yeah.
We tend to have a problem with propagating the features that are done in such a way because it's harder for people to find out about that.
So a whole new feature of cache management would be the best way forward.
I think so. It's probably not a lot of work in terms of list. It's basically listing from a specific project. Deleting is just the normal delete operation on a specific project, things like that. The pinning is the only one, but that could need to be added anyway.
This might be a good thing to do a spec for, Simon. And we can try to, every so often there are requests for, like an intern wants to do something or a student needs to do something. And it would be nice to have this. You touch a lot of stuff, so you would learn a lot doing this, but it's not really that hard. It's just a time consuming. So I think it would be worth sort of speccing it out, and then somebody could pick it up. So I'd encourage you to do that.
Okay, let me have a go at writing a spec on this.
Okay.
Okay, thanks everyone. The mine was definitely not 50 minutes.
All right, great. Rajat, you're up. I'm not hearing any audio, Rajat. Are you?
Yeah, you seem to be, your mic playing with you.
Yeah, Blue Jeans is showing that you're not muted.
Yeah, he's double muted somewhere.
But yeah.
Am I audible now?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Okay, it might be worse since I set it to my microphone, but I hope it will work. So yeah, this regarding the image feature, I decided to work in this yoga release, and we discussed this during the cross project with Nova at the PTG. And there was a proposal by Gorka to optimize the current behavior to pass the connector information while calling this vimage to Cinder. So like I can explain the whole flow, but just want to go briefly through the change from the discussion we had at that time. So that connector information passing in the reimage API, and then Cinder will do the attachment update. And I proposed the same in the Nova spec, but Lee Arwood had a concern with it, like it will introduce a new unicorn path and we have to take care of all the corner cases around that path. And he said like it will be better if we just do it the old way, like other operations do, like Nova will be doing the attachment update. And also he had the concern like the connection information will pass to the events API payload. So that might not be a good reliable option to send the information there. So regarding all these concerns, I changed the Nova spec to move back to the old way. Like Nova will do all the connection steps, the create, update, and complete. And that's what's reflected in the Cinder spec as well. So I have proposed the Nova spec. It has, I think, merged, but it depends on the Cinder spec as well. And I have updated the same information in the Cinder spec. So just wanted to share that for awareness.
Okay, thanks for the explanation on why they rejected that. I think it makes sense. It's better to be a little less performant, but make sure that we use the code paths that are proven to work fine. Makes sense.
Yeah, I think the reasoning was like the Cinder volume service will need to do the same work regardless of if Nova calls it or Cinder calls it, but we will have one less API call from the Nova side to Cinder API, the attachment update. So that maybe it will improve performance, but not by much because the main work is done by the Cinder volume service for all the connection mapping and like.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember perfectly the attach update code, if it's meant to do what they want to do, the additional call that they are going to be doing. But yeah,
So,
if you look into it, it's fine.
yeah, I think they were just validation checks on the API, but I need to check again. But yeah, I think just the API call is the main optimization in the view path. And since Lee Arwood maintains all the Nova code around it, he had this issue like there will be a new path he needs to learn about and manage that as well in this new feature. So
one quick question, because I forgot the code path, the flow that you suggested for this feature. So the image is currently attached to Nova. Then Nova say, okay, I want to reimagine this one. And in that case, if I remember correctly, there were several options. One was that maybe the image is cloned. Another is the image would be actually be rewritten, right? So is that correct? There is a possibility of a clone in changing the actual volume underneath?
Yeah, I think it was one of the alternatives to like create a new volume with the image and just swap it with the existing volume, but then the volume ID changes and
no, but the volume ID doesn't need to change. We can do like we do in migration, where we have the name ID, which refers to the actual ID that the backend knows about. But from the user perspective, we still use the ID field to recognize the volumes. So that is not a problem. So the current functionality, is it doing anything else besides writing data to that disk?
No, so the proposed solution is just to rewrite the whole image onto the volume.
Okay, so in that case, why do they need to update the attachment information?
So when the volume is attached to the instance, they will create a new attachment and delete the old one to keep the volume in reserved state. And during this whole operation, since Cinder is performing it, the volume will remain in reserved state. After this,
the whole point of that flow is so that Cinder can actually create the volume in the most efficient way. The reimagine can do it in an efficient way. An efficient way may be clone and delete the old one. That is efficient, because otherwise they would not need to update the connection information. The connection information would be the same for them. We just attach the volume, write data, that's it. We would tell them, hey, it's on. And they could just continue using the volume. They would just need to, before calling us, they would clean their buffers, read and write buffers, and the connection would be valid because nobody would be destroying the volume or doing anything weird with it. It would not change in any way. It'll land on the backend, right?
So you're suggesting like we shouldn't do this attachment thing, like create a new attachment and delete the old one to keep the volume in that state?
No, I'm saying that the reason why that was the original flow is because the reimagine should be done in the most efficient way that Cinder can do it. And it's like when you create a volume from image. Cinder has a lot of mechanisms to do it right. It can clone, it can maybe download, it's in the cache. There are different mechanisms, right?
Yeah, but the clone one, like, are you suggesting the image cache? Like I'm not sure which one you're referring to with clone.
Yeah. For example, using the cache. Why they reimagine should not be using the cache?
I think there has like the spec only mentions generic flow and not these cases. Like there could be a case where the image is not existing in the cache, and like
Yeah, but that's fine
most.
if it's not in the cache, right? But if it is a lot faster to use the image from the cache for a reimagine than to actually download it and writing it. Just think of this idea. I have 20 VMs on the same host, and I'm going to start reimagining them all. By not going through the Cinder cache for the operation, the performance is going to be pretty bad. If it's only for one VM with one image volume, that's fine. It's going to be mostly, it's not a big deal. But if you reimagine multiple ones, then being able to use the Cinder cache could be a big benefit.
Yeah, I understand the point, but it hasn't been mentioned in the spec. Like it was not discussed. The current idea proposed is just the generic way how Nova does it.
From the Nova perspective, they don't care. It's not their
Yeah.
problem. Because what they do is by detaching the originally volume and reserving with a second one, they leave Cinder do whatever they want. All they want is when they call the update with the connector information for it to work fine, to connect to the whatever the volume currently is.
Okay. Yeah, I think in the image cache code.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I guess in the image cache code, we generally create a new volume and all that flow is. And in this particular part, we are just using that the generic image create flow where we download the image. Just that function we are using in this currently. And yeah, but we could do it like.
I think that was, at least that's what I mentioned originally in one of the discussions, and that is why the Nova flow should be that way, because they don't know if what Cinder is going to do. Cinder is going to do its thing. They don't need to know, but Cinder may change the volume underneath to do their reimagine. So since they cannot tell, the connection information may need to be changed. That was the reason why they needed to do that whole flow, and Cinder could change the connection information. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to do it that way. I'm not saying that the feature needs to be done, everything at once. So we can go with the non-efficient flow first, and then add the optimization of being able to use the cache. It can be done into steps, but the Cinder spec, I think, should reflect that the end goal is to be able to use the cache.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can mention that in like future work items, like which we can do in this case.
Only needs to be done in Cinder. Yeah, Nova spec could remain the same.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I can update the spec with this. Yeah. Oh.
Just
don't make it harder.
Sorry, I didn't get you.
Just a question about, is Nova's spec deadline before or after ours? Do you know?
I think it should be at the same time. They are having another spec review festival on 14th. So It should be 17th, I guess. I can check, but in the schedule, I think it's on the same day.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the inputs. Yeah, that's all from me.
Okay, next up is RBD driver again, enabling backend QoS.
Yep, that's me. Hello, everyone. Sorry if I've screwed anything up for the specs or the initial versions. This is my first time sort of committing upstream to OpenStack, so it's all a bit new to me. Effectively, this is just a rejig of some code that someone else had written earlier on, with some of the comments from the original code sort of baked into the latest version of it. Effectively, it enables backend qual specs for the RBD driver and sets them on the Ceph cluster itself rather than using the libvirt related quasing, so the front end quasing. I don't know sort of what you guys want to know beyond that. The stuff I had questions about was if someone could walk me through the testing portion of it, mainly because I'm completely unfamiliar with the test framework. There is a little bit I'm looking at changing on it in the setup volume bit because right now it wouldn't delete quas specs if you retyped from a volume with quas specs to a volume type without quas specs. So I think it probably should do that, but it's probably up for discussion also with the wider community. Yeah.
Do we have testing for the other drivers that have QoS backend?
I
I think it's doing the local driver test driver. The driver tests itself rather than a common one. I seem to remember when I did it for Pure.
I think we probably have unit tests just to make sure that the stuff's getting passed through the way you expect. But as far as like actually making sure they work, I don't know that we have anything in place.
Yeah, I think when I did the Pure backend QoS, I only did unit tests.
I literally just copied the test from the previous person who had done it without really actually understanding what it was doing. So I understood the meat of the actual changes, but not any of the unit tests because I'm not really a developer. So.
I have a question regarding this. How does this interact with RPD mirroring? So when you set it in the original, I assume RPD works fine when you set it on the
local cluster. Yeah, if I'm honest, I have no idea. If only because the Ceph clusters I have are not mirrored. So I don't even have a way to test this, unfortunately.
Yeah, because we need to be sure that RPD mirroring actually mirrors the QoS as well.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just ask on a Ceph mailing list or something to be sure.
Yeah, I can do that. No worries.
And like you said, we need to be able to remove the QoS option on retype.
Yeah, right now it does it if like you're retyping from a volume with a quad spec set to another one with quad spec set. But if you're retyping from a volume with backend quas spec set to one that like has absolutely no quas specs, it wouldn't remove the values. So it's something for me to just go back and rejig. It's something I didn't really like out of the original one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because that needs to happen. True.
Yep.
And I assume this also happens on creation.
Yes.
Okay. Because the spec doesn't mention creation, I think it just mentions the retype. You focus on the more obscure case and not the normal creation. Yep.
Yeah, no, they definitely work on volume creation also. I'm sorry, I just kind of I was in the retyping space because we were moving some guys from some different storage arrays to a new Ceph cluster. So yeah, I'll update the spec to reflect that.
You need to make sure that it covers a lot of different things, not just the retype. As Gorka says, you've got to things like, does RDB support snapshotting, and how do you deal with snapshotting and cloning, and manage. I don't know whether Ceph supports managing an existing volume and doing Cinder manage on it, because you need to bring QoS into that as well.
What do you mean by Cinder manage?
I don't know whether Ceph does it, but there's a concept of a volume that is outside of the control of Cinder and is somewhere.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Control of Ceph, so that's called Cinder manage. So you might need to, when you bring it in, bring it a specific volume type that's got a back-end quas. You need to make sure that quas is applied to that volume you're bringing in as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can probably test that out myself. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look at that. Let me add that to the notes.
So I went through this recently, so you can have a look at the change I did, and that's got all the tests in that we use as unit tests.
Okay, all right. I'll go through that.
Yeah, I just checked the code. The cloning seems to be fine because it's calling the setup volume method, but the manage seems to be a simple renaming. So that doesn't seem to do anything regarding the type.
You do need to make sure that it pulls it in and applies it. And again, in snapshots as well, you need to think about volumes from snapshots and such like.
Yeah, I'd have to. I'll volumes from snapshots.
Does my question above make sense? About the, are those things do those features need to be tested on the API as unit test, or is there anything that is visible from the API level and can be tested maybe in some Tempest-like test? Maybe not. I just don't know.
Well, I don't know at the Tempest level, there could be a test, because if you set QoS restrictions, you could go into the VM and actually try to use the disk and see if they perform. You can actually do operations beyond that, but I don't think that's a good test, because it could be just that the network is overloaded, that the cluster is actually a toy Ceph deployment for the test and not a fully Ceph cluster. Maybe it's, I usually play with Ceph with the Ceph demo container, and that's literally a toy cluster. So
in my mind, the real test would be like, I've set this in Cinder. Do I see this reflected in the config settings for the image? And if it's set there, then you're trusting Ceph to do its job. rather than trying to do some sort of test where you test the amount of I/O you can do or something.
Yeah, but that kind of test is either manual test or test that cannot be done in Tempest, because you have to actually know what the backend is, and you have to use RBD commands to check it.
Yeah,
that's why sense. Luigi was saying, is there any way for Tempest, which is at the API level, at the user level, can actually tell whether it's working or not, to prevent regressions and things like that. That was his point. And also for other backends, because this issue is not only relevant for RBD. Do other backends that they support QoS on the backend, are they actually working? We don't know in Tempest. But I'm not sure we can actually know it, because like you say, then we need to actually look at the backend to be sure.
Yeah. No, makes sense.
Okay, great. So we'll look for a revision on your spec, and then people can leave comments on there. Okay, great. Simon, you're up again about the NVMe multipath spec.
Yeah, just wanted to see if anyone's got any thoughts about it. You know, the current spec, we talked about it at the last weekly meeting. If anyone looked at it, are we good with this? Is there anything missing? Gorka, I know you were heavily involved in this. Unfortunately, the guys from Kioxia don't appear to be on this mid-cycle, so we can't ask them. Trying to get an update of where we are with this, and whether we think we are in a state where we can potentially have this ready for yoga.
I can only speak for myself, which is that I dropped the ball on this one. I got into the whole quota refactoring mess, and I barely just got out of that rabbit hole recently, so I will go back and check to see where we're at.
Yeah, I know that the Kioxia guys apparently were already in the process of writing some code for multipathing, but again, they're not here, so we can't get an update on where we are with this.
So actually, Simon, that link you have here is to the NOS brick patch.
Is it?
Yeah.
So it is. One more.
But that's probably could use some attention also.
Probably could. Hang on a minute. Where did I get that one from? Yeah. I'll fix that. I'll find the right one.
Okay.
If Gary ever responds. I'll change that.
Okay. All right. So request noticed. Okay. Okay. Task status to volumes or backups during live migration.
Yeah, I guess that's me. Thanks again for having me. I'm trying not to use as much time as I did last time. I don't know if you remember me bringing that up, and we discussed that at length. This is our attempt. It's actually me and Nicholas who wrote a blueprint, which superseded an older blueprint. I guess you did that, the superseding, Brian. And we also created a spec. We kind of looked left and right and found that the similar thing is already been done for Nova. The main thing is getting rid of a single big state machine. It's all happening in one field, syncing everything or serializing literally everything, and taking it apart just like Nova did, between an actual state of the block storage volume that you present, as in use or available or whatever, and then another field that holds the state of the task that's currently running, allowing those tasks, they certainly might depend on the actual state of the volume, but not necessarily. And that's pretty much we added a lot of links to how Nova actually justified their design and having two state machines that have some connections, but not everything's interconnected. Yeah, that's our attempt. Please discuss, fire away.
I haven't read the spec, so maybe I'm saying something that doesn't really affect it. So by having the task, the status being separated, now you would be able to do different operations. And what I'm wondering is if this affects in some way the status of that needs to be reported by Cinder for older API calls. So if since now we would be adding the task, it would, when you list your volumes and you see the status, we would probably want with a new API to report as well if there is any ongoing task or anything like that, right? So that would be...
Well, yeah, I understand your point and fair question. We believe that reducing the values that are reported by the current state field is one step, and it should be compatible. Certainly, as another micro version, yes, there's less possible values, and you will not, if you use that micro version, you will not see that state. Yes, like the state backing up will not be reported by that field anymore because you take that out and move that to the task field. But any client that does not know about the new field will just use the old one, and usually all the states of a volume, at least to our understanding, still makes sense, right? As you want to know what's the state of the volume, not whether there's a task running. But yes, if you have scripts and things that look for, is there a current backup going, but then use the API to look for backups and don't use the volume state is our case, with a smile. Certainly, it's a bit of a change, but there's no way of moving things out of the field without anyone noticing that this information is not visible in that field anymore.
Yeah, so basically it's going to have a kind of a translation layer where it will say, oh, this is an old API, so I have to report the status in a different way because they don't know about the tasks, right? Because if
that's up for discussion if you want to do it that way. Otherwise, it would be somewhat of a breaking change. But question is it a breaking change? We're not talking about the Cinder backup side of things. Certainly, code changes, handling the coordination of things, that has to happen. Yes, but user facing, as in what you send out via the API. Do you really want a translation layer? Because that's pretty hard to do because you're actually disconnecting the two things. And how do you reconnect them?
The thing is, if I start a backup operation, for example, and I have a script that it says, request the backup. This is asynchronous. So the next step I do is, what's the status? Is this backing up? Let's say my script checks for backing up the status, and suddenly, because we have tasks, it doesn't say backing up anymore. It says in use or something like that. My script is going to fail because I don't know about tasks. That's a new thing. I'm old. That was the idea.
So yeah, so to mitigate that, it would be an overlay of the old states from the tasks to be sent out for all micro versions that are below the new one that we introduced. Should be, help me if I'm wrong, should be pretty easy because there cannot be multiples, right? It's just an overlay. As in if the volume is currently attaching or whatever's happening and there's a backing up in the task, report that, right? And that's a pretty cool idea, actually. I believe it's less complicated than I initially anticipated when you said that. It's just it's a pretty basic rule of take preference in that and report it. Yeah. Maintain the old state machine to the client. Yes. Cool.
Yeah, in theory, that should be enough to report the ongoing operation, like you say, an overlay, and not report everything, as long as they don't start doing multiple things. For example, if you suddenly decide to detach it from Nova, now Nova checks the status of the volume, and suddenly it's not in use, it's reported as backing up, and now Nova is going to complain. Now this starts to get tricky.
But we're talking about the REST API, right? So user-facing.
Yep. But user-facing, Nova uses that interface. So Nova can ask, hey, what's the status of the volume before I start doing a live migration? Like that.
But exactly that's what we want to enable, right? So
okay. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there are going to be a bunch of changes in Nova for it to actually be able to play nice with this feature, because they do status checks. Yeah.
But if we have to work hard on that side, it's just a few people working on that change. It's not affecting everyone, right? So we try to make it easy on everyone, but hard on us, right? Implementing it. I see.
Okay.
So Nova has to deal with the complexity of that, use the two fields and the actual data, the newest micro version to facilitate the new data model. But the users using the old micro versions, they certainly should see the world as it was before.
Yep, sounds right. Another thing, we currently use the status of volumes as a locking mechanism Cinder at the API level. We do conditional updates, which is basically an update, and you say where in the SQL. So basically, it's update the status to this value if, which is where in SQL, and you pass the possible options that need to be in the database. So this will need to be updated, right? Because now you would not be using the status, only you would have tasks. So it gets a little bit trickier because it's a different database, right?
Provided I didn't check the code yet, that there is any condition that currently exists that relies on a state that we remove or move over to the state a task state field. If the condition is only
almost every single API change, you can look at the code in the API, different API location, mostly Cinder volume API. You will see that there is this thing called conditional update, which is basically telling Cinder, telling the Cinder code to generate a SQL query that says, update the database, the volume in the database with these values if these conditions are met, and that is done at with a single SQL query. So the thing is that query those queries will need to be changed, because now you are not relying on the volume's status only, but also on the tasks. And there are a lot of queries with conditional updates, because what we do
they rely on states. And they rely on the
state.
tasks. Okay, of the task. The to be task states. All right.
Exactly. Okay. Because right now, what Cinder does is, you want to delete a volume. The volume needs to be unavailable or in error or in a bunch of states. If it's in backing up, it will not work, because it wants it to be in certain states. If we have this different task that leave the status as it was, then it will not work, the conditional update, because we are trying to move away from all these ing states, and our API relies on the fact that we have a bunch of ing states to reject API request.
Thank you. That's very valuable feedback for the actual consequences of moving forward that change. a blunt question. The general idea, I mean, we discussed it at length, the general idea and the proposal of introducing a task field and moving those task states. Do you feel that's something that we could kind of pursue then, or how's it gonna look towards the accept or not accept state of this spec that we do? How much time do we have left to get that in an order, or what else do you need for that spec to happen, for it to be accepted for the Yoga release?
In general, I like the idea of having tasks, because for something like a retype, we could have, maybe we can even add a task that says that it's actually migrating the retyping and things like that. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure of the spec and how Nova did it, but I think it should be kind of fine. I mean, conceptually at a high level, I don't see a problem with having the concept of tasks added to a resource.
Right. So we move on with the review. I mean, certainly the implications you just brought up, we need to look into and add them to the spec. Certainly, absolutely. And how would we then carry on? Could anybody be in a closer loop with us in this review process for the specs, so we don't miss the deadline to get in a proper shape? I mean, yeah.
I will try to have a look at the spec to confirm that I am understanding everything correct, that everything is there, and that I'm not missing anything big.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, we will do the work, certainly, but you have more insight of the complexity of the implications, and we gladly use that to get the spec up to a proper state that we can have it accepted.
Yeah,
Okay.
The only question I have is, so with the Nova task states, I guess I need to read the spec, so I'll commit to doing that this week. The Nova task states, like a VM can usually just do one task at a time, but with volumes, multiple stuff can happen to them.
No.
No? Okay.
No, only one. Same for Nova. I mean, we kept it there because that is a whole new area of complexity, because you would then need to have rules which tasks can happen simultaneously, and that's a whole different ballgame to do that. What we want to do is having something that is working on or with a volume disconnected from the volume state of it being errors or in use or attached, like the actual block storage state. So that's pretty much. I mean, in the spec, I have we added a few links to actually the Nova wiki with the state machine illustrated, and then you see their motivations of multiple fields, the reasoning. I mean, they did a lot of work that we benefited from writing the spec.
Okay, great. All right, I'll read through that.
Thank you very much for your time again, and see you in the review then.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, another Ceph topic. Keeping the last n snapshots per backup.
Yeah, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So we've already talked about this topic in one of the last Cinder meetings. And yeah, as you said, this basically adds a new config option to keep only a certain number of snapshots per backup. And yeah, there's already much information written on the Etherpad. And I hope the points there are more clear than last time and make the implications and reasons for this clearer.
Yeah, I think you were very clear on your needs when proposing this feature. My concerns were not that your needs were unreasonable. Actually, I think they are really, really easy to understand, the implication on the data function. My concerns were how this feature was introducing a regression that we fixed, where suddenly not having a one-to-one match between the volume snapshots and the backups, there is several incremental backups, would lead to us having to do not being able, how would I say, suddenly you don't have a one-to-one mapping, so the incremental doesn't actually work as it should and things like that, because it's not going to be able to find the snapshot. And I don't know if the current code would at some point do a full backup. So let's say you have the volume, you create a backup, so there's a snapshot. Another backup, another snapshot. Another backup, another snapshot. And the configuration is to only keep the last two. So the first one is removed, the first snapshot. Now you request another incremental backup. Now, sorry, you delete two backups. So there is currently one backup and the volume as it is. Now you request an incremental backup, and it will be a full backup, if I remember correctly, and not incremental. Because the RPD image, there is not a correlation. It will not be able to find one. So now you think that you have an incremental backup, but you have a full backup. This last one. That was my concern with the feature, that it introduces a regression, and I think at some point they pointed to the original Baxilla that was fixed. I don't know if it was Chainika that fixed it. I don't remember. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, but isn't it intransparent to the end user if you actually have an incremental backup or a full backup? So we just need to correct me if I'm wrong, but we just need to have one last backup, be it either incremental or full, and then we can do a full backup, an incremental backup, I mean.
Well, from a user perspective, the big difference will be that at that point, it takes longer to do the backup. It may not be a problem, but that is all that the user would be able to see. But from the administrator perspective, if they have users doing this kind of things, creating backups, deleting them, creating them again, they could start wasting a lot of space as well, right?
Well, it only comes down. I mean, the backups, they relate to each other, right? The incrementals, they create dependent backups. So the user would need to go back in time, deletes incremental backup after incremental backup to reach the point where there is no source snapshot anymore. And that would then, which is a trade-off and configurable in that sense, at which point that happens, or how realistic that is, that somebody who does like a daily backup, like reading from the example that Jan wrote in the Etherpad, it's a daily backup that somebody does, and then he does a new full backup. And the change would allow for the cloud provider to choose that not that many snapshots remain on the source. But be it, if the user would go back in time, delete incremental backups one after one, because that's what he has to do, because they're dependent, reach the point where there's no source snapshot on the source volume anymore, and that would create a full backup, as you said, taking longer, using more space on the backup storage, which is actually the trade-off. That's the whole idea, right?
Yeah, but there is one little thing. Now, myself, as a support person, get a call from a customer and says, hey, Cinder says this is an incremental backup. I'm checking my RBD. This is not incremental. What the hell is going on? And I have to go check their configuration options and check their logs, see what the series of operation went on, and say, okay, this has happened because the flow has been create until the limit. One was removed, then they deleted, then they created. And then what happens is that Cinder's view of the storage does not correlate with the actual reality. it says it's incremental, but it's not incremental. It's a full backup. It doesn't match what Cinder thinks it's there with what actually is there, because it's not incremental. Cinder database says this is an incremental backup, but RBD says nope, no incremental. There's no dependency. I mean, I did the whole diff from the original point. So
the alternative would be to make it transparent to the user that now a full backup is required. If you would in any way allow for this configuration to be there, as in I don't want that many incrementals to remain, you could limit the total amount of generations that the user can do, but then you would actually expose that to the user and reject a new request, as in no more incrementals, you now have to do a full backup. Or you do that transparently, this is what the change would do, right? And fall back automatically to a full backup, which actually is only a diff of 100% of the volume. So everything's incremental until it's 100% incremental.
Yeah, I just think that in a way this breaks the incremental backup feature, because then you are not doing incrementals. That's my concern with this feature.
But the actual use case was to save space on the source, as in not waste that much space on the source, so because it's expensive, is what Jan wrote, right?
Yep.
So, is there any other way to achieve that? As in restrict the user to not create as many incremental backups. As in, don't keep as much stuff on the source because it's so expensive. It's my fancy NVMe storage, 10 times more expensive than the spinning Rust I have for backups. That's the trade-off. Certainly, I want to make. I want to save money. And this is storage I cannot charge the user for, right? Because this is the worst storage, expensive storage, and the one I cannot charge for, because my implementation is not up to par.
Yeah, I understand that need, and just not real with breaking the one-to-one relationship between the snapshots and backups.
It's a configuration option, right? So it's something, the default would just be as it is now, and if somebody feels like our price difference in the two storage implementations I run is so vast, or my users are doing 60 days of incrementals, and this is just too much to me on the source, I want to limit that somehow. Probably the nicest thing I can do. The user doesn't even have to know. I just do it for him.
Currently, when Cinder does a full backup, does it change the parent ID? I think it used to do it. Doesn't seem to change it. Okay. Well, I will not block the feature because I understand the need. It's just that I don't love what needs to happen. So
So I guess we have to document this clearly somehow, that if you turn on this feature, it most likely will break incremental backups.
It's not that it will break. It should still work. That's the thing. It works.
Yeah, the backups will work. They'll just all be full, or most of them will.
In one point it will be full, and you can. A malicious user may end up forcing all full backups, and you would still waste a lot space, but at least you would be losing it in the chip storage, which is the backup.
And I have a quota on that, because that is the storage I have a quota on, I charge on. How much backup? Even if it's cheap, I still charge for it. You can, I mean, to the user, you could say you can do so many generations, and if you want to ever tell that to the user, but there's so many things you would do behind the curtain that the user, it's not relevant to the user much. But yes, you're correct. The feature, as in the configuration file or in the documentation for Cinder backup, would need to be explained a little, right? As in what that means, and so some documentation is lacking, right?
One question I would like to put it regarding the, we would put it in the RBD driver documentation section, and a bit of explanation in the description of the configuration option should be enough.
Yeah, so the RBD is the place. Yeah, sorry, I was confused. The RBD is the place, because that if somebody uses RBD and checks out the config option, that the explanation would need.
Yeah, and we have a specific page for each of the drivers explaining how things are configured and providing a little bit this kind of information, the implications of setting a configuration option beyond a simple description. So the budget would need to make sure that it's properly explained there. And I have one question. Would having differential backups help in any way? Because we've had requests before of having not only incremental, but also differential backups in Cinder, which we don't currently have. Would that help? And related to it, specifically accepting dispatch. Would that help?
By pure logic, differential backups are self-sustained, right? They don't depend on anything. They have the full difference of the original point in time to now, and it's always the full difference, because but then it's wasting more storage. Otherwise, you could just increment to the previous, increment to the previous, increment to the previous, and a differential backup would contain all the diffs to the initial state of the volume.
Not necessarily the initial, right?
Oh, well, true. Yeah, true. Yeah. But yeah, the difference would be they would be independent, right? Have an independent life cycle. Because I don't know, honestly, doesn't RBD allow for we don't do that in the backup, but would an RBD snapshot that is in the middle would be deletable, and it would just move the pointers, or as in could I rip one out of the middle of a chain?
I'm not sure that you can actually delete it, or you would have to flatten it.
Yeah, you have to. I believe you have to flatten it. Then you're correct. The differential backup will make a difference, because it's the same issue, right? So, but you do create more data on that.
So that makes me wonder one question regarding this feature. Wouldn't this have also performance implication if we are going to delete the oldest snapshots? This feature reaches the limit, then there would need to be a flatten there, right?
No,
you can get, because what you're doing is you have the volume, you create a snapshot, another, and now you delete the oldest one.
Yeah, you only delete the difference that happened between the initial state and that state. Those different blocks, that's the 80 gigabytes that Jan wrote. Like, that's the diff of that day, the oldest day that you delete.
Yeah, but don't you have a dependency on that?
No.
that chain. I will have to think about it.
Okay, let's think about that one some more. Felipe, or do you just have a quick? We got like 1 minute left. Gorka, I was going to propose that your topic we could do at the next Cinder meeting. Would you want to do it in? We could do the meeting in video if that would be useful, so people can ask questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I would like that if it's possible in video, because the idea is to make it a little bit easier to explain things. If people have had the time to look at the complex with a spec, to actually go over a quick Q&A. Yep.
Yeah, so we'll do the next Cinder meeting in video, and we'll just start with Gorka, and then we'll do the rest of the business after that. And then Felipe, are you here? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we can do this.
Yeah, if you go ahead and talk about the NFS online extend bug real quick.
Okay, it's pretty straightforward. We discussed this during the last Cinder meeting, and we had the idea of fix the problem with VM is down. So when the VM is down, the Nova cannot extend the volume. So what I test and work is the bug comes from the fact that the Nova is locking the volume. So when the VM is down, the Nova is no more locking. So we can do a normal Cinder extend as even it's in use state, the Cinder works because the lock's no more there. So I applied this test and create and update the patch with unit test and upload this there so we can start reviewing it. I also add here that during the partial fix, they disallowed the NFS generic and the quota byte driver. In my patch, I didn't allow for quota byte because I cannot test this driver. So I will leave this to the driver maintainers, and I'm just allowing this feature for NFS generic driver. So it's skipping not supporting not support scenarios like encrypted volumes, and applying this new approach. So we can have a look. We start reviewing this and see if it's worked. At least on my internal test, it's working. We have some Tempest tests, so we can allow this run with Tempest to see if it will pass on this for the NFS generic driver. And yeah, that's the update for this.
I don't know I think probably Eric remembers better because he's the one who asked about it. I think he asked last time about the case where the volume is from the Cinder perspective attached to a VM, but the VM is currently shelved or things like that, where the connection information remains. Have you tested those cases?
Which case, sorry?
Okay, so the Cinder code, I just, if I remember correctly, Eric said, okay, sometimes Cinder says, oh, it is attached to Nova. Okay, let me call Nova to do the operation. But the VM is actually shut down. It is halted, or it is shelved, or it is something else. And would Nova be able to do the operation?
Yeah, I test this. As I said, this when the Nova is shut down, when the VM is shut down, the Nova cannot extend the volume. So, but the bug comes from the fact that the lock is from Nova. And when the VM is shut down, the lock is no more there. So the Cinder can do the operation. So the bug does not exist anymore, right? So it's like when the VM is shut down, it's like as a scenario where the volume is not attached. We can use the same approach because the lock does not exist.
Yeah, we can use the same approach, but I don't. Are you taking that into consideration? The case where Cinder thinks that it is attached, yet it's not really attached. Well, it is attached.